Well, Florin, thank you so much for helping with my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Florin Gannett, and I am a aerospace engineer, and I work for Blue Origin out here in West Texas doing test engineering on B3, the engine for New Shepard, our suborbital launch vehicle, and then I'm also doing test operations on the B3U for the second stage of New Glenn. Something really excited to be a part of that, and then previously, I graduated from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign in aerospace engineering. And previous to that, I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, in the Chicago area. And I was actually born in a really small town in Romania. So kind of been all over the place. I came to the US when I was little and grew up in Chicago, found out I liked engineering and space and planes. And here I am.
That's really exciting. I understand also the B3 be used for the Lunar Lander as well. Is that correct? Or
No, so that will be the B7. So I think
the
B3
B7?
will only be used for the second stage of New Glenn.
Okay. So in Romania, did you have an interest in aerospace, or did that come later?
It came later. I think in Romania when I was little, I had I think like every other engineer growing up, I like to take things apart and break things and just see how they work and stuff like that. I used to take all my toys apart, and my dad bought me like this whole construction set. And so instead of playing with it, I took like the crane apart, I took the trucks apart and all that stuff. And so I think that's where it really started. And then I remember as a little kid, always wondering like what the stars were in the sky when I was really little and what was up there and just learning more about the world as I grew up. I thought it was really, really cool. And then in high school is when I finally made the decision. I had to choose kind of like what engineering I wanted to go into. And I loved space games. Like everything out there, I'm like a huge gamer. So I loved space games. And I figured, you know what? Let's do it, in reality. And I chose aerospace engineering and I ended up going to U of I, which was only 2 hours away from home, which was perfect.
Uh, as you were telling your story, it reminded me that whenever I was like in the 1980s, my first computer was like a Commodore VIC 20, which I
Yeah.
don't know if you know about that, but you hook it up to a
Yeah.
TV and it had no permanent, mine didn't have any, permanent memory. So you like boot it up and you type in the basic game. And then when you turned it off, the next time you boot it up, you had to type in the game. So, but I think it was
Yeah.
instrumental to actually kind of connect the dots between these words are making the computer do that thing. And I think whenever, you know, taking apart your toys and putting them back together, I think it was really foundational to kind of how you became an engineer.
Absolutely. I think like I said, every engineer that I've met has that same story. Like they grew up like one of my engineering teachers took apart his washing machine when he was a kid, and I'll always remember that story. So I think it really is foundational to just being curious about how the world works, and it just starts from there for sure.
Uh, as our toys have gotten more expensive and more black box,
Hmm.
less ability to actually see the inner workings of them, do you think ultimately our success in engineering might actually be undermining our long-term success in engineering because of that?
Ooh, that's a great question. Maybe I think it depends, right? It depends on if because you on one hand you do have these very expensive and crazy advanced toys coming out for kids to play with that maybe they can't take apart and play with as much, but I think on the other hand you also have, I've noticed that something that's around now that wasn't when I was a kid was like engineering kits. Kids can buy Arduinos now and learn how to code at the age of 10. That wasn't around when I was a kid. And I think a lot of other kits are out there for science sets and wanting to play with doing your own chemistry at home. And I never had an opportunity to do that. And I think it's like two sided, right? So I think as we advance it, I think we're able to teach kids more at a younger age and get them ready for engineering earlier. But at the same time, I do think it does take away from that like very personal experience that they have with taking things apart and playing with them. I think it's the same analogy of like most cars coming out now, they have their own DRM and you can't really touch them under the hood. Whereas back in the day, you know, everybody could be a mechanic at home working on their cars, and that's not really the case anymore. So I think it's interesting where we're heading, and I think it's a double-edged sword that we have to be careful about.
Yeah, and about the kits, I mean that's a good call out because there are, I mean you get a kit for everything, and I
Yeah.
mean you want to create a combustion engine, you get a kit and put it together, and maybe
Yeah.
it has like transparent parts to it, and you can actually see it run. But I also feel like there's a very different result from sort of guided learning and guided exploration versus unguided and self-directed. Like, I feel like the kids feel like they should be giving us better engineers, but maybe they're just giving us better technicians.
That's a really good point. I think so. I think so too. I think that it's important that, you know, they it should, to me, what those kind of toys and kits should be doing is it just gives you the experience of like what you can do with them, and then you should just let the kid have free reign, you know, to explore and learn and even make mistakes on their own, because that's ultimately how you really learn, right? And so that was me as a kid when I took things apart and broke them and realized, wait, I can't put it back together. I did break it, you know, it's done, right? Like that's a learning experience there. And then you can, you know, talk about, you know, well, why did it break? How did it break? You know, how do you make sure that doesn't happen again? And I think that if you do have kids that grow up in like a very, very guided way with engineering, that is all they will know. I mean, I've had experience with colleagues, you know, throughout college that, you know, they're very by the book, you know, do everything with class, straight A's. But if you were to put them in like a test environment where it's unpredictable, you know, they don't respond as fast as they would as just someone that, you know, just every weekend spent their time trying to build a rocket engine in their garage, right? So I think different experiences really shape the path that an engineer would go down. And I think that someone being way too much on a guided path kind of narrows their vision of what engineering can do for them and what they're able to do and grow as an engineer.
Yeah, and then also the other side about it is the presentation. Things that look good but really aren't deep, and then things that
Yep.
are really deep but look like, oh my God.
Yeah, I think that's funny because one of the biggest lessons I learned, I think, through engineering is that more complicated and more complex is not always better. You know, as an engineer, you should you have a goal in mind and your requirements, and you should try to make that as simple and user friendly as possible, right? Just adding more complexity does not always make it better, and I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with um, in the industry for sure. Is, you know, it's like you don't have to spend weeks doing simulations on a computer if you could do something on the back of an envelope, right? That will get you 95% of the way.
Oh, exactly. And how good does the simulation really need to be to let you know if you should create it in real life? And ultimately, it's the real life thing that's going to prove it out, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and I also noticed in your LinkedIn profile, you have the experience of working at SpaceX.
I did, yeah. I was there for an internship working on their Falcon booster test team. So I worked on test operations, maintenance, work orders, and then some process improvement projects that I found really, really engaging. I'm all about process improvement and trying to do the most with what you have in the most efficient way possible. I love the numbers in that.
And doing it often. I mean, if you're launching one rocket every decade, your opportunities for process improvement probably are not there.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it 3 times a day, then you could probably get some really good stuff going on.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really great experience working there, and I think I learned a lot. Like it was my first real internship in the aerospace industry, and so it was a huge learning experience. I mean, SpaceX is, you know, among the best of the best engineers. So working on a team like that, I think I was very privileged to be there and see everything they do and learn from them.
Are you familiar with Tom Cusack, the CEO of Firefly Aerospace?
Yeah.
I don't know if you know about his background, but I went to the New World conference, I think about 4 years ago,
Mhm.
and he was giving a talk about his career. He actually started out at SpaceX, went to Blue Origin, went to Virgin
Yeah.
Galactic, and
Yeah.
then he says after he ran out of billionaires with rocket companies, decided to start his own. So,
Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting that among new space, you know, if you call that with Blue and Virgin and and SpaceX is I think a lot of people hop around, and I think there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's a different experience everywhere you go, and different opportunities, different people to work with, and different projects. And I do think that there's a lot of young people in our industry that are really good at that startup mentality. You know, like coming in, hit the ground running, get a lot of work done really quickly. You know, and then once they start to transitioning into that more official capacity, I think then, you know, they're like, okay, what's the next exciting venture, you know, they can hop on. And I think that's really awesome. I think that's completely new to our industry. And I think it's really exciting to see all these startups. You know, I mean, maybe not really startups anymore, right? Since everyone's launching so much throughout the year, but it's definitely exciting to see people kind of working together as well, right? Like there's no animosity between engineers from different companies. It's we're all in it together for the, you know, for that ultimate goal of getting humanity to space. So regardless of where people work or their backgrounds are, I think it's really awesome that we all come together as a team at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, definitely. I see that a lot in the space community. It's really heartwarming, what have you. And I, I think there's going to be a lot of changes that some of the traditional players are going to have to absorb if they plan to stay around.
Absolutely.
Um, and it's a lot easier to get funding if you're like, I have a team of people who have all these years of experience and success record than, hey, we're a bunch of people building a rock in our garage. Come
Yeah.
fund us.
That's for sure. And I think I saw my experience with that was I started a rocket organization at U of I to try and be the first collegiate team to launch to suborbital space. And funding was always the most difficult thing to overcome. You know, you can get as many professors on your side as you want, or as many, you know, technical projects, but at the end of the day, unless you have people with real experience that can show that, I think it's really hard to get funding. But then, you know, you come into the industry and you realize, wow, like there are startups everywhere. And there's, you know, I'm sure there's so many stealth companies that we're unaware of right now that are going to, you know, publicly announce themselves soon. It's really exciting to see just how many people have just different ideas, right? Like I think with old space, it kind of used to be like they were all doing kind of like the same thing. It was just a different version of it. Whereas new space, I think everyone's doing, you know, Blue Origin is doing it their way. SpaceX is doing it another way. Spin Launch, you know, is doing it their complete different way. I think, you know, Firefly, Virgin, everyone has a different idea about how to get to space. And I think that's super exciting. And I'm really interested to see who the, you know, who the winners end up being in that race.
Yeah, and maybe not so much winners as like little legs in the baton, right? Who's going
Yeah.
to pick up the baton and they'll give it to some other people and kind of pass it on. It's like a cycle. I hope.
Yeah, it'll be ongoing forever, right? Regardless of who's leading it, for sure.
But what you kind of touched on there was one of the big reasons why we don't have millions of people working in space today is that we had players that had these really expensive solutions and they really couldn't tolerate any risk. And how can you have risk and innovation? Like I, uh, it's like it's so funny listening to presentations about why we should go to space and hearing on one hand people talk about proven technology off the shelf commercially available and all these technological spinoffs because in my mind those two things are incompatible. Like
Yeah.
if you already have a solution you're not innovating. um, you know
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that we became, I mean, this is just like my experience talking to people that, you know, were around in the Apollo era and past that they became, their opinion was that they became so risk adverse that they stopped innovating completely, right? I mean, we still have launches from vehicles that are 30, 40 years old that just have been refurbished, right? And so I think that at some point you just got to say, you know, this is how much risk we have, right? We reduced it as much as we can. These are the benefits of us going forward with this process. And this is how we're going to do it. And if everybody's on board, everybody's on board. But at some point, we got to say either are we going to go back to space or are we not? You know, let's make a decision here and be 100% in, and let's go do it, regardless of that risk that exists. I think that, you know, the technological advances we've made since Apollo are astounding, amazing, just in, you know, computing and materials and propulsion structures just across the board. it's night and day from what it was during the Apollo era. So I think that for us to still be so risk adverse and kind of holding ourselves back, I think is really hurting the industry. And I think that's changing. I think now you see, everybody's like, we're getting to the moon 2024, we're going to do it one way or another. Everybody's pushing as fast as they can. The industry is booming right now, I think, growing. Everybody is hiring. You're seeing so many more engineers coming to the field, so many companies. So I think for me, it feels like this is what they must have felt like during the Apollo era leading up to the moon launch. It's like everyone's on board. We're going to do it. We're going to keep moving forward. And we just got to make sure that we keep that momentum up and not stop, and not let ourselves be, not trip over ourselves, and to keep that going.
And how do we do that? How do we keep that momentum going?
Oh, see, I think that's the tough part that people are trying to figure out. And I think it really comes down to the public perception of what we do. I think that if we're able to get the public's backing on going to the moon, going there to stay, starting moon colonies, and I think a lot of space tourism will help with that, right? I think that a lot of people, normal people day to day, they don't think about the moon or space or rocket launches like we do. And I think that if we're able to normalize that more and more for everyone, then I think that publicly people will be more accepting of what we want to do. And then you start getting into the commercial side of things and start saying, we have all the resources on the moon that we can, harvest and utilize for manufacturing. And then all the space in Leo we can utilize for tourism, manufacturing, and research. When you start making that commercial and economic argument for going to space, I think that's when you really start getting people to listen. And so we just got to make sure we keep that up. And I think there's a lot of companies on that side that I've seen are starting up that, they're not focused on the launch aspect or the colonization aspect. They're focused on, the support system, like who are going to be the doctors in space or the lawyers, or what does society look like in space? What about space architecture, right? Like some things that, maybe me as a test engineer, I would never think about, but it is something we have to figure out if we're going to go. And so to see that we have that support backing starting to grow across the board, I think that we're putting ourselves in a really, really good spot to, the foundation will be built, and therefore we can keep going and moving forward that way. And with the public support, that would only increase our chances of success and ongoing expansion.
Yeah, the public support I think is key to government expenditure. And I just wonder, so my original plan with this project was I was
Mm-hmm.
working at home for 2 years before I started this project last December, and I would just stay at home and I wouldn't see people outside the house. So I was like, go and interview somebody at like Starbucks or at the
Yeah.
store, random everyday people, about, hey, did you know we're going to the moon? And most often the answer I got was no. Most people don't know we're going to the moon in
Yeah.
2024. So how can they support something they don't know about?
Yeah, exactly. And I think SpaceX has done a tremendous job with correcting that issue, right? Like before, it used to be NASA did a lot of outreach, but I think NASA was really limited with the funding they received for outreach and support in those areas. I think SpaceX, and particularly Elon booming, with the internet and the growth of the internet, really brought space to more and more normalized people. And I mean, you see the latest, Dragon launches with the crews. I mean, they've millions and millions and millions of views and on every news channel, right? Which, I don't think every NASA launch was on every news channel every time it happened, right? Every time we had cargo going back to the ISS. So I think we're putting ourselves in a really good spot. We just got to keep moving forward with that. And I think a lot of other companies, should take advantage of that. The internet's right there. Twitter is right there. Put yourself out there and, outreach, try and reach out to normal people.
Hey, good to see you, Caitlin.
So yeah, it's really, I think we're right there, right? And we just got to keep pushing forward with it.
Um, and next fall, Tom Cruise is supposed to go up to the International Space Station. What kind of impact do you think that might have?
Sorry, I didn't hear the first part of the question.
Oh, next fall, Tom Cruise is supposed to be taking
Oh, yeah. I think that's awesome. Honestly, I think I'm actually surprised we don't have more movies in space, because for me, the first time I saw something like that was it was one of the James Bonds where they were on like the space station and they were fighting the Russians and all that, like one of the old ones. And I thought that was just so cool. And it's like, why don't we have more movies and that space environment? Which I think is amazing because that's, most people's interaction are through movies, are through media. And so I think for Tom Cruise to go up there and shoot a movie in space, I think everyone's going to hear about it. Everyone's going to want to see it, and then everyone's going to want to go do it. And I think that's awesome. I think that, the more people we get involved in space tourism, ultimately, the cheaper it becomes for everyone else, and in the long term, I hope I live long enough to see that, like, you can buy someone a birthday present, a ticket to the ISS or a ticket to Leo, right? Like that would be amazing for us to reach that point within my lifetime. And that's what I would love to see. But I think it helps. I think every little thing helps to get us there.
Um, I think these famous people going to space help to draw attention to it. But just looking at it from the um, the cinematography experience, I have
Hmm.
trouble imagining a movie filmed in space actually being a better film than something like done in a studio with special effects and what have you. It's just, uh,
Yeah,
how do you manage that?
I think that from that point, people would watch it not for the cinematographic experience, but from just knowing that it's in space, right? It's knowing that it's real. I think is the aspect that a lot of people will be drawn to, not so much the visuals. Like I know when Gravity came out, they tried to make it as realistic as possible. And when I saw that movie, half the time you forget that it's a movie and you forget that it's not in space and that it was shot in a studio. So I think that it may not look as glamorous as studios can make movies seem or CGI, but I think that people when they see it and be like, "Whoa, that's real. That's the space station. That's a real astronaut." I think that's what's going to really draw them to and be like, I want to do that. I want to be a movie star and go to space or something like that. And then, companies like Blue and Virgin and SpaceX can say, well, you can do it. And we're trying to make it as cheap as possible for you to be able to do it.
It's kind of an interesting curve in the sense of like Apollo 11, lots of interest. Apollo 12, not so much, right?
Yeah.
So like that novelty curve like goes way down. I mean, like moon rocks are really valuable now, but I guarantee you, once there's lots of them, it's
Yeah.
gonna, it won't matter.
And I think that's something that we have to be careful about. But I also think we'll be different in our case because, it's one thing to get to the moon, right? And then, we got there with Apollo 11. It was great. And then it did fall off with Apollo 12 and the rest. But I think the circumstances were different, right? Like we were in a space race. It was the height of the Cold War. We were, in a fight against Russia. Whereas today, it's more of, to me, it feels like it's more of humanity together trying to reach the moon. And it's not just, a check mark, we did it. It's, we're going there for resources for our, humanity's survival. We're going there for the expansion and the curiosity of going to space. And the aspect that we're going there to stay, I think is the real big one that it won't fall off, right? Like it'll get to the point where if we have people living on the moon, you can look up every day at the moon and see like, wow, there are people there right now living there, breathing on the moon. And I don't think that will ever, fall off that novelty curve for me at least. But I'm biased, but I think that for normal people too, they would be like, wow, like it's like when I always think of it as like like crossing the ocean to the Americas, where it's like people looked on the horizon and thought, wow, like there are people on the other side of that vast ocean, right? I don't know if that today it's more normalized with travel, but I think at least for a while, once we get people back to the moon, I think it's going to be really incredible for everybody. And it won't stop there, right? Like we have the moon, and that's going to be so much expansion. I mean, working on moon colonies can take us, centuries to get right. And then you have Mars, right? The next stepping stone. And beyond that, all the moons of Jupiter and everything we want to do in terms of deep space exploration. So I think that the possibilities are endless to keep that excitement alive and to keep it going one after another.
Um, Do you still stay in touch with people back in Romania? And what are do they get excited about what you're doing?
Yeah, I have a lot of my family on Facebook, and we keep in touch, and they can't believe that I do what I do. You know, they remember me as this like skinny little kid that was just, I was a pretty terrible kid. I got in trouble a lot, and I remember that I used to light fires, like I was a pyromaniac as a kid. And then they all of them say it's like, wow, now they pay you to do that. So it's really funny how like they all look back and like, I can't believe Florin's doing that. But everyone back home is really excited because I share a lot of what is going on in the industry on my Facebook and on LinkedIn. And I think they see that and they're like, wow, like we're doing that. Like I think a lot of people are unaware of what we do. And I think that the more outreach we do is will really help. But I think they're all amazed of what we're doing, what we're capable of doing.
Do you ever get the reaction of, you know, what about kind of the infrastructure here and
Yep,
all of we're trying to get
always.
food on the table and stuff like that, and those are real concerns, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if you're hungry or you know somebody that's hungry, or your plumbing in your house isn't working, um, finding out that you're having these great problem solvers figure out how to put somebody on the moon or in space, really might be difficult to accept. And I was just wondering, is it even possible to bridge that, or
yeah,
like how does that look?
absolutely. I've I've had this argument with so many people forever. Right? There's always someone that's like, "Well, what about Earth? What about us? We should focus on here." And my response is, we are doing both, right? Like I'm an aerospace engineer, therefore I work on aerospace. There are civil engineers that work on our infrastructure. There are doctors and scientists and climate researchers that work on climate change and everything on Earth, right? Why can't we do both? Because we are. A lot of NASA is working on actually Earth and Earth observation for climate change and figuring out how we can, stem that and get ahead of it. And so for people that say like, oh, well, we need to focus on Earth, is we are. We absolutely are. And it is a great concern to us aerospace engineers too, because what happens on Earth determines how we're able to do what we want to do in space. And my other argument for that is what we want to do with aerospace ultimately benefits Earth, right? If you look at Blue Origin's goal of millions of people living and working in space, that goal is to take manufacturing off of Earth. And when you relieve Earth of all the manufacturing that we're doing, all of the pollution we're putting into the atmosphere, right? Like that's where we can say Earth is now once again this very, very great planet that we have that's really nice with all this livable and breathable atmosphere that's found nowhere else in the solar system. It's really, really great to be here. So that's our ultimate goal is how can we use space to our advantage to help Earth out, right? And I mean, and then you also look at all the technologies that are available in everyday life because of aerospace and NASA and the Apollo missions. Things like Velcro is always mentioned, but then you talk about you're able to talk to someone through a screen that could be on the other side of the world without any lag, right? So it's all of that is because of aerospace engineering and technological advances because of what we're doing. So I think for a lot of people, it's they don't know where, or maybe they're not exposed to where the technology that's in their hands is coming from, and realizing that what we do benefit them greatly.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, the number, uh, I mean, if we had unlimited energy, what could we do? I mean, in
Yeah,
terms of being able to transform matter from one thing to another, recycling. I mean, how much energy is needed for that, and automation and robotics and growing food. I mean, if you had unlimited energy, you could grow as much food as you want in any
yeah,
circumstance. And I heard one thing that was really fascinating to me is that the sun is radiating energy in all directions, but only 1/700th billionth of that energy falls on the earth. So like, just that little fraction is driving
yeah,
everything that we see on earth. Every plant growing, every animal who's eating those plants, the weather cycles, the energy. And if you just got a little, I mean, virtually unlimited power is available to us, and we could
yeah.
just capture more of it.
And I think we are more than capable of doing that. we need to take our time to do it right. And I think that the more we expand into, low earth and, and to the moon and start realizing like, wow, we do have so many resources up here. We can do manufacturing and research in space and get it to a point where it's cheaper to do it in space than on Earth, or ultimately more beneficial to do it in space than on Earth. I think that will be the great, a really, really great like gate for humanity to walk through for sure. Is that energy is out there. We just have to harness it and utilize it and do it. It's just we have to overcome that very big hump right now to get us to that future.
Now, I think I know the answer to this next question, but it'd be interesting to hear it from you directly. Um, if it was safe and affordable, would you go to space?
Oh, absolutely. I would go tomorrow if I could. And it's just for the experience, right? Of knowing that it's something that is unlike anything else. And I always hear what the Apollo astronauts would say that like when they looked back on Earth, from the moon or going around the moon, that they felt there was like this feeling of like, all why do we have petty squabbles and politics and war when you see that like little tiny blue dot, that's all we have right now, right? And I think that for me, seeing that would be a huge emotional experience. And I think if we normalize that for other people, I think could really change everyone's perspective on like that's all we have, right? That's all we have. So we should take care of it. And for me, I think it would just be awesome to hang out on the moon, and I would collect space rocks all day for sure.
Would you go to Mars and immigrate there and live there?
If I was asked to, I think that the Mars environment is a lot more harsh than people realize. I think that we like to think of these, great big domed cities, and it's like Mars is great because we'll be able to make, it has ice on its poles, and we'll be able to get water and all these things. But then you also have to worry about the fact that it's so far away from Earth. You have a communication lag of thinking like, 20 to 40 minutes one way. You also have to worry about the radiation exposure, right? Whereas on the moon, it's right here, it's right in our backyard, right? So I think the danger with going to Mars is so much greater than going to the moon. And for me, we should start with the moon, take all the lessons learned there before we try hopping off to Mars. But if I had to go, I would go. I think it would be just an equally amazing experience, and to get to be one of the first pioneers, right? Like I don't think you'd be able to turn that down.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. Kind of a follow-on to that, whenever astronaut in the International Space Station has a problem, they call down the mission control and say, "Hey, we have this problem," and then they have an army of engineers that kind of go about
Yeah.
solving the problem, and then walks the astronaut through the solution. How do you do that with a 20 to 40-minute time delay?
Right. Like so and I think that comes into play that the first people to go there have to be extremely self-sustainable. And the systems that are sent along with them and the engineering and the housing and everything has to be extremely engineeringly sound and safe for them to be able to do that. Right. And I think then you get into redundancy on different systems and factors of safety that, you may not require for something in low Earth space. Right. So I think that's where the challenge will come in is like, what if something happens on Mars and we won't find out about it, for half an hour, is that window too large for us to help them? And that's a scary thought for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate your time. And is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
No, I think we touched on everything. This was an awesome experience. I never I get to like always just voice my space stuff to my family, but during holidays. But it's awesome to talk to someone else, in the industry that knows what's going on. So it was great. It was a great experience. Thank you.
Well, if you know of anybody else, I could use a lot more people to talk to.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll be sure to share on my social media and LinkedIn and let everyone know to sign up. This was awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and you have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.